Tonight for our return of the Friday night drop-in. We had these for many, many years, and this is very special because Chris Smith, our author talk here tonight, has been a long-time mindfulness teacher here at UW Health. We drag him in from Milwaukee from time to time when he's willing to make the trip. But how long have you taught here? Like 15 years?
Yeah, maybe? I think somewhere in there.
15 years. So some of you have gotten the opportunity to take a class with Chris. He's a master teacher. Chris and I met at a mindfulness conference probably 20 years ago, I'm thinking.
Probably, at least.
When Chris, while giving a presentation, took his sock off and put it on a projector and said, "What is this?" And he was teaching the group of people to use description rather than conceptualization as a way to start teaching mindfulness. And I was like, I got to get to know that guy. And we did. We were pen pals for a while, and then I ended up moving out to Madison. And I said, I've met this guy before. And he has been an incredible friend, a great mentor. When I was struggling with post-concussion symptoms, this was one of the guys who said, I just have complete trust in you. And just a good friend, highest caliber.
Thanks.
This book that Chris has written here, Be a Good Story, which is available on sale in the back for $25. It's an amazing book. It is like having a conversation with Chris, like having a conversation with a good friend. It's a lot of, Chris is quite a storyteller, just describing how you learn from just bumbling through life. Yeah, I don't know if you ever feel like you're bumbling through life. But yeah, so Chris has very generously offered to donate all sales of the book tonight to the UW Health Mindfulness program. So cash or check, Peggy in the back can take cash, and then if you would like to use Venmo, I can handle that. So
Just one other. Yeah. We do accept gold coins and your firstborn. So
yeah. So just a little bit about Chris's professional background. Besides being a mindfulness teacher, he's a psychotherapist. We are both trained family therapists, and so have had a lot of interesting conversations over the years. He runs the Academy for Mindfulness and does a lot of consulting for organizations. Also been a trainer for the VA for the Whole Health Initiative, which is one of the things that's been integrating mindfulness into a huge organization. Chris has also collaborated on a lot of research here, including with Madison Police Department. I know there's some folks from there tonight. In the school system. Where else have you been?
That's probably good enough.
Yeah, you've taught some teen classes here too.
That's true.
So, without further ado, just want to welcome you, and please tell us a little bit about your book and teach us a little bit.
All right. Thank you, sir.
All right.
So first of all, one of the things I wanted to say is just to thank you so much for the gift of your time. It's such a precious thing. And for you to squander it here tonight on a Friday night is very meaningful. So thank you for the gift of your time. One of the things that I've been doing over the years in my teaching that I like also to do here is to begin by acknowledging the land that we are on. And this particular reading derives from the American Medical Association. And it says that we acknowledge that we are all living off of taken ancestral lands of indigenous peoples for thousands of years. We acknowledge the extraction of brilliance, energy, and life for labor forced upon people of African descent for more than 400 years. We celebrate the resilience and strength that all indigenous people and descendants of Africa has shown in this country and worldwide. We carry our ancestors with us, and we are continually called to be better as we lead this work. So it just felt a proper way to begin our time together. I'd like also to begin with a host of gratitudes. I would like to acknowledge Lisa and the UW Mindfulness program. Thank you so much for making this happen. I wanted to ask, too, how many of the persons in here have taken an MBSR class here? So again, thank you. Round of applause for you. How many teachers or assistant teachers do we have here that are part of the MBSR program? Just a show of hands. Thank you for all of your work that you do. And I do have a wish for you. I have a wish that you have a friend like Bob Gillespie in your life. Bob is the one who really has been the force. I would have never done this. So thank you so much, Bob. And I wish all of you to have a friend like Bob in your life. We also have our book illustrator, the person who illustrated this book, and one of my favorite dogs, the only dog, Vinny. I wore my Pomeranian socks in honor of Vinny. Both different colors, just want to make sure. So my dear, my partner, would you raise your hand? And thank you so much. And as Bob said, all of the sales of the book go to the mindfulness program. We do accept gold coins, as you know, and to be honest, that's been one of the biggest thrills for me with this book, is I've given 95% of it away to different organizations. And so it's just such an honor to have the privilege to be able to do that. And so to be able to give back to a program that has given me so much is just something that very much makes my heart smile. Or if I was in a MBSR class, I would also say makes my liver smile too. One of the things that I've learned in teaching, and maybe those of you who teach also know this, that how important it is to bring a certain amount of movement. Just sitting, at least for me, for a period of time is just like the worst, isn't it? And so I thought one of the things that we might do is to do just some very gentle movement as a way of beginning our time together tonight. One of the things I've been doing in light of some of the work that I have been a part of in social determinants of health and diversity, equity, and inclusivity is what I call a movement of equity. And this is what I've been offering in terms of movement practice. So this can be done seated. It can be done standing up. You get to choose with the body that you're wearing in this present moment. So I'm going to stand. And so a movement at equity is this, that the invitation is to listen to this body that you happen to be wearing in this particular moment. And whether you're seated, whether you're standing, or even sitting, laying on the floor, it doesn't matter. The invitation is to listen to your body and to begin to ask, how would it like to be moved? How would it like to be stretched? And so in just listening to that, again, listening to your body, is there a certain way that it would like to be moved? And just simply to follow that. And it will probably be all different, and if you have a mind like mine, you'll be comparing your movement maybe to others. And if you do that, the invitation is to bring as much kindness and compassion, acceptance, and if you so dare so, even a little bit of humor. Yeah. And notice what that feels like. And the question that sometimes we often ask in this room is that if you did this a little more regularly, how might this impact your health? How might this impact your well-being, your stress level, and relationships? Just a few questions. And then, as a way of bringing maybe a guided practice, our final movement here will be this. The invitation is to bring the corners of your mouth up. And when you do that, notice what happens in your body and in your mind. We thought we'd begin with a little bit of a stillness practice, and I've been playing around with different types of practices, so I thought I'd try maybe a little bit of a different one. This one's going to have a pivot at some point. There's a point where I'll say, that at least where I grew up, look, Mom, no hands. Do you ever hear that phrase? We're going to do a little bit of that. So the invitation is to find a posture that for you is comfortable, whatever that posture might be. And just allow yourself to find, or allow the posture to find you. And the invitation, to the degree that you are able, is to invite stillness into your particular posture, whatever that might be. See if it's possible, to the degree that you are able, in this moment on a Friday night, to embody stillness. And then next, as you begin to invite the stillness, to bring in just a sense of allowing this particular moment. A sense of just allowing whatever it is that shows up. Rumi says, this being human is a guest house. Every Friday night, a new arrival. And so whatever is arriving in your present moment experience, to the degree that you are able to invite, to allow, as best as you are able. And as you are allowing, the invitation is just to see if it's possible to invite a sense of rest. And even if this is available, is it possible in this moment to notice in your body that there may be places that are of rest, that might even be just a little bit quiet? And if that might be true for you, just the invitation is just to investigate that, be with that, allow that. And then we're going to take a little pivot here in light of sort of the subject matter tonight. Rumi says the subject matter tonight is love. And we also want to invite story. And just notice as you are allowing and you are inviting stillness in the body, notice the stories, perhaps stories in the mind, maybe stories from the body. There are some say that we live in constant story, that there is always a story playing, like the soft music in the background. And just notice that if that's available to you tonight. And if not, no worries. And then next, the invitation is just to let go of all of it. and allow yourself just simply to rest. Allow the chair to support the body, the floor, and you're just resting. It's like maybe after you have made a dinner and you've cooked the meal and you've done the dishes, and then there's this moment, if you're like me, you find your favorite couch or your chair and you just allow yourself to sit and rest, and see if that might be available and possible in this moment. Just allowing yourself just to rest. And then if your eyes are closed, the invitation is to slowly, as if you had all of the time in the world, to open your eyes. And as my good friend Dr. Gillespie does, he invites us just to look around the room, just to kind of help to orient ourselves. If you happen to catch your neighbor's eyes, you can smile at them. But it's optional, so. So thank you for a little practice. So one of the things I was thinking of for tonight is at least to begin with a story of how this all started for me. And then I thought I'd do maybe a couple readings, perhaps, and if you have any questions, comments, or complaints, would love to hear any or all of those. And then I thought of something fun, is to make sure that after I share a few, and we have a time of maybe some questions, that maybe an invitation for you to maybe come together with a group of 2 or 3 and for you to tell stories to each other that might come up. It's optional. But that really, in some ways, is what the book is about. For me, one of the themes of this book and what came up for me as I was sort of working my way through it, which, by the way, a friend of mine says, what is it like writing a book? Some of you I know have written lots of stuff. And my experience was, I said, imagine waking up and seeing a giant dinosaur, a giant monster, a dragon, and you get swallowed by that dragon. And you spend endless weeks and months being thrown back and forth in darkness, not knowing where you are, where you might be, until finally you get pooped out. You could tell I hang around 2-year-olds. So the idea for me, in my own experience, is when I hear a story from someone else, like if you would tell me a story, I would just think of one in my life. And so that was my hope in writing this book, that in telling some of my own stories, that you might think of stories in your life. And my feeling is this comes from a Janet Mock. Janet Mock is a writer, a director, a transgender rights activist. She says this amazing quote. She says, I believe in telling our stories, first to ourselves, and then to one another. And the world is a revolutionary act that can lead to love. And that, to me, really kind of sums up, to me, this whole process. So, this book began actually from the cushion, the meditation cushion. One day I was meditating, and this idea came up. I was beginning to do some new work consulting that I know would be more challenging, and I thought I probably should invest time in working with a coach. And so I thought, well, who am I going to reach out to? And so this person, who is now a colonel in the Army, came up in my mind. I thought, oh my gosh, should I ask that person? But it came up, and I thought, okay. So I wrote an email. Sure enough, they wrote me back, and they said, you're not going to believe this. I'm actually in training to be a coach. Would you like to be one of my guinea pigs? And I said, well, why not? And out of that process came eventually what I have here is this book. So that's sort of how it began. But like many stories, they have many kind of roots. And I thought I'd begin by sharing another place that it came from. Part of my work has been in marriage and family therapy. And one of the things I noticed, and my work was totally with those persons who could not afford therapy, who were probably involved in the court system. And I had this idea that, gosh, if I would be able to go into the jail, the county jail, and maybe teach mindfulness, could that be helpful when they released and were back into the community? To me, it made great sense. So I wrote a memo, explained it, even included some of the research, sent it up the chain, and guess what I heard?
Yes.
Nothing. Nothing. And I would write it every, 6 months, nothing. One day, one summer, I'm sitting in my office, my phone rings. 3 years later, Chris, can you come over to the jail? We would like for you to teach over there. And I thought, okay, I'll be there. And so here's how that one goes. It started in the county jail. For 90 minutes on Wednesday mornings, I facilitated a mindfulness meditation class. And the inmates loved stories. The routine was always the same. Upon entering the waiting room, I was escorted to a furbished storage room. Sound familiar? During the walk, the guard provided a rundown of activity in the jail over the past 24 hours. One day, it could be about inmates arguing over television channels. Another day, it was the antics of an intoxicated inmate. Today, it was quiet. The guard was relieved. When we reached the room, he unlocked the door with a loud clack that was not unlike the sound of an MRI machine. In response, my body flinched. I entered, sat on a thin plastic chair, and waited for the guard to secure the door. Clack! My body recoiled, tightening up again. I was now secured. As I marked time, I looked around the room. The architecture was dedicated to dullness and monotony. Picture ceiling tile you've seen in government buildings, doctor offices, and hardware stores. One fluorescent light worked tirelessly to illuminate the space. Truthfully, it hurt my eyes. All four walls were cinder block and painted institutional gray. Stale air filled my lungs. On the opposing wall was a red emergency button. Once, an inmate accidentally bumped his head against it during a fit of laughter. In less than 10 seconds, 4 armed guards swarmed the storage room. And although I argued that it was an accident, the guards' faces said they thought otherwise. I often felt claustrophobic in this room and immediately started practicing deep breathing to ward off an anxiety attack. Within minutes, I heard the faint sound of sandals swishing across the hard floor as the men walked down the hallway. 8 inmates in orange shirts and pants arriving for meditation. Clack! A guard unlocked the door and the men filed in. As they adjusted their chairs, the sound of plastic rubbing against the tile echoed off of the cold walls. When the sound ceased and the men settled, the guard surveyed the room once more. Clack! The door was secured for a final time. All that was left were the inmates and me sitting in horseshoe style in silence. I began by welcoming each man and thanking him for attending. They could have stayed in bed. In fact, several who were present the previous week slept through today's class. We began with movement. On flimsy plastic chairs, we slowly stretched toward our knees and shins as we coordinated movement with breath. Continuing with our breath, we initiated a seated cat-cow yoga flow. Gently, we guided our chins to the right shoulder, then to the left. With hands on our hips, we gently twisted our torsos to the left and right, like squeezing out a wash rag. As we completed our practice, our final stretch was lifting the corners of our mouth up. You remember that one? Quiet laughter popcorned into the room. Since entering the jail, this was the first moment I took a complete breath, feeling my belly, jaw, and shoulders soften. It was time for seated mindfulness meditation. The men embodied a posture which integrated two qualities, attention and relaxation. Eyes could be open or closed. Once the men found the seated position, or once the posture found them, a stillness steadily cradled the room. I talked briefly about boat anchors. Lake Michigan was only a few miles away. It provided a local touch point. Anchors offer stability, I told them, particularly when the water is rough or when the winds roar. Our anchors today were the body, the breath, and sound. Each man was invited to choose one of those three anchors. When the mind wandered, the instructions were to simply notice the interruption and, without making it a big deal, return to their anchor. This was the practice. For the next 15 minutes, we observed how the distracted mind easily slipped into the past and future. We observed different feeling states or sensations in the body. No matter what we observed, we practiced being aware in those unmoored moments with kindness, non-judgment, and compassion. Instead of being harsh and critical and running away from our experiences, we practiced benevolence and affection toward ourselves as we returned again and again to our anchor and present moment experience. After 15 minutes of mindfulness meditation, the men were invited to rest. Thus, after the work of meditation, the instruction was to take a break, relax. Picture kindergarten children laying on mats or blankets, a time to just be. However, instead of a comfortable mat or blanket, we found our respite on cheap plastic chairs. Somehow we made it work. After 5 minutes of resting, we returned to our converted storage closet. The small circle of men reflected on the day's practice. For many, it was the first time they'd experienced peace in jail. They were surprised it was possible to be relaxed here. For others, it became an interval to reflect on their life. Many professed a desire to better themselves. And for some, being still, even for short moments, was extremely uncomfortable. We spent time normalizing this experience and offering techniques for working with discomfort. Next, I handed one of the men a book, My Grandfather's Blessings by Rachel Naomi Remen. I loved this book and found its stories compelling and heartfelt. Parentheses, to be completely transparent, it inspired all stories in this book. I thought the men might feel the same way, so I brought Remen's book with me one week and asked if they'd be interested in listening to a story. They agreed. Her stories were so popular that they asked me to bring the book to each class. And we developed a routine. Each week, a different inmate randomly flipped through the pages until he was moved to stop. Wherever his thumb paused was the reading for that day. Sometimes the inmates read. Sometimes they asked me to read. Sometimes they picked someone in the circle. Anticipation breathed through the room as the reader began. Wonder what's coming at us today, someone whispered. After the reading, we often marveled how the story was exactly what was needed in the moment. There were stories of strength and love and healing and the simple pleasures of life. We were amazed how familiar the stories of a physician with Crohn's disease on the West Coast felt. They connected us to her, to each other, and to life itself. We came to realize we shared similar aspirations. We had similar dreams and hopes. We wanted to matter, to love, to be loved. We wanted to laugh and feel peace and contentment. We wanted safety and health and freedom. For the remainder of our time, we asked questions. What do you think she meant by that? We debated. Do you think it's better to be safe or loved? Or are they the same thing? Many of the readings elicited stories from our own lives. One inmate wiped tears from his eyes as he shared how his 10-year-old nephew wrote him a letter every week. This is hard to read. Many times after a story was read, a lingering silence fell on the group, the weight of it penetrating our hearts, minds, and imaginations, touching something deep and indescribable. It connected us beyond language and words. We never wanted our time to end. We longed for just one more story. Clack. My pulse again sprinting through my veins, my breath quickening. A guard opened the door. It was time to go. 90 minutes was over. The men stood and shuffled into the hallway, lining up for inspection. On one occasion, while the inmates were being inspected, and I was walking toward the main entrance, a man looked around, smiled, and gave us our final benediction. Hey everyone, don't forget, be a good story today. At first I didn't understand. Something about what he said bypassed my brain and went straight into my body. I remember just smiling. What did he mean? When I reflected, the inmate was invoking us to live fully and deeply, to live with purpose, wonder, and a sense of humor. Just like the stories in Remen's book, he was imploring us to live with kindness and an open heart. Looking beyond appearances and deficits, to live our aspirations. To be a good story meant asking questions and staying curious. Speaking and being our truth. It's a way of saying, be the best version of yourself. To bless the world and those around you, no matter if you're a mindfulness instructor, a guard, or an inmate in secure detention. So that's how it started. So just a little pause, kind of let it settle a little bit. Just notice what might be coming up for you. Are there any questions? Complaints? Comments? Or not? To have another one.
Chris, did you ever get used to the clapping?
No.
curious.
Yeah, I wish I could say I did.
How challenging was it? So he was my MBS art teacher 12 years ago. So how was it different with them than it was with a class that you've taught?
That's a great question, thank you. I think I noticed that I walked in with a lot of preconceived ideas, and that probably was the hardest part. And the environment for me, it was not a familiar environment for me, and I don't think I ever totally adjusted. Just there was so much in the environment, the lighting, the sounds, the smells. However, after a period of time, I grew to love, the inmates that showed up, and was constantly amazed at their insights and their generosity. And in that way, they were no different than, they made obviously some really bad choices. But in terms of that context, a funny thing, another kind of funny story that I didn't write about, I mentioned the intoxicated inmates that show up who cause havoc. And that happened in one of the sessions. And I remember they all came in and they filed in, and they were telling me about all of the things that this intoxicated inmate was doing that kept them up, and yelling and saying a lot of naughty things, And one of them looked at me and pointed at me and asked me this question, and I'm going to quote, "Did this shit work?" And I didn't know what to do, so I kind of took a breath, and I did what a lot of mindfulness teachers do that I learned here. Well, let's practice and let's find out. And so we did practice, and he said, "Thank you." And we even went farther. Is it possible to integrate those very experiences into your practice? Can even those practices or those antics be a way for you to actually include in your practice? So in other words, how might we work with discomfort? What are ways that we might compassionately work with discomfort? And so that became a whole discussion, and later on another session or two of practice around that. So they were my teachers, just like those of us who have had the privilege of teaching. We always have such great teachers around us.
How long did the sessions go? Like, how long?
90 minutes.
But how many months or?
Great question, yeah. So I think I was able to do it for roughly about 2 years.
Oh.
Yeah. And here's the other cool thing. I had this other idea, is like, God, I said, if we can give the guys, why can't we do something with the women? And so we actually did that. So we had some women mindfulness instructors go into the women's section. And that made me feel better.
You mentioned a question that you had going into this would possibly help them when they were finished with their time adjusting back to community. Like, any ideas on?
Great question. I wish I had, and Simon, I wish I had some data on that. It was something that I was always curious about, and I honestly don't know. I would like to think with some, but I can honestly say no, for some, probably not true. But I think there were some that definitely found the practice to be helpful for them in terms of, for many of them, it was just emotional regulation and maybe some behavioral regulation. They've developed more awareness. It seemed, what I would love to be able to see is those persons who were able to participate in more classes, did that help? But that to me would be, and I'm sure there are studies out there that might, looking at you, Simon, and Dan, maybe maybe there's more, some data out there about that. That to me would be of interest.
I have no doubt it helped, but it would be nice to, know the facts or.
Yeah. Yeah, yes.
Why did it end?
I decided to write books and become a consultant.
So there's no one else going?
I don't know that. I mean, it was going after I left. Yeah. Yeah.
So Chris, did you use the story as a door of entry into mindfulness, or did you set up mindfulness practice first and then?
Yeah. It was mindfulness practice first, and I almost felt, Carmen, like, well, if you ever practice a little bit of mindfulness or been on a retreat, and somebody reads a poem, you're like, oh my God, because I think you're kind of more maybe open and receptive, and so I feel like a little bit of that happened. We would practice movement first, and then we'd practice a stillness practice. Then they loved to be read to, and they love the story. They love stories. And so I think that helped us all to really hear the stories. It put us in a better posture, I think, to listen.
Do you have any inclination to go back to that same place with your book and read that?
I'd love to, yeah, I'd love to. Although I think they like Rachel Naomi Remen better, and I kind of do too.
You could start a writing program.
Yeah, I love it. We think alike, yes. All right, could I read maybe another one, and then we'll see what happens. So I'm going to go a little deeper on this one, and I thought long and hard. We were up north visiting friends, and we sat around a campfire one night with your mom and dad, and we saw the northern lights, by the way, which was pretty amazing. And I asked him this question, and I said, well, what story do you think I should read? And so we talked about it, and this is what came up. I almost want to put a little context around this. Should I? Sure. We went to a play, my wife and I went to a play last night, and it was about, and I don't know if some of you remember this name. In Milwaukee, it's a famous name, Laurentia Bembenek. And, I see some head. And it was an interesting play, and one of the things that I really took away from it is, wow, what a hard life, and how the system did not work in her favor in many ways. But they ended it happy, and I just thought, oh, they ruined it. I mean, here we spent 2.5 hours with just the harshness of life, and then they put this little happiness at the ending, and I just thought, to me, it was like, it's okay that it doesn't have to turn out okay. It can be sad, and it can be hard. And that's what inspired this next piece, is not everything has a happy ending. And so I give you that as a little story, and you do that what you want. It's called Seeing Father for the Last Time. And I like this quote. I did, Dan, by the way, try to look up many different ways of trying to find out who got this, who said this, and I couldn't find it. I looked up all my... I did. Getting over a painful experience is much like crossing monkey bars. You have to let go at some point in order to move forward. He repeated my name 3 times. Chris, My father's staccato voice barked, "Chris?" My name sounded foreign, and now unsure in his mouth. "Chris, are you there?" He pleaded. Each time he repeated my name, it became more expressive and desperate. He didn't seem to know whether he was leaving a message or not. It reminded me of, and I'm thinking to myself, of how older people can struggle with technology. He continued, "I'm getting rid of a few things and wondered if you want this picture of my parents. Let me know." Click. That was it. The 11-second message was my father's voice. I hadn't talked to my father for years. His call evoked memories, like the humid night, summer night in my 7th year, my mother and father standing on opposite sides of my bed. They were arguing. My father threatened my mother and me. He warned my mother that he's going to take me away and that she would never see me again. This brought out my mother's fury and her timidity. She shot back, "No, no you won't." He was intoxicated, mean, and reminded my mother of how unfit she was as a human being. I felt bad for her. I was afraid. My heart pounded, and as the threats grew, I feared for my life. My body shook. I pleaded with them to stop, but both refused to back down. Their argument only escalated, voices getting louder. They turned on me. "Who do you want to live with?" I was silent, hoping this would go away. "Chris, who do you want to live with?" Again, silence. My head hurt. My face was hot. Tears streamed down my cheeks. They asked again. There was no way out. I said, "My mom." Feeling guilt, shame, and fear, I wondered what would happen next. Would my father kill us? Worse, would he abandon me? Instead, he continued to humiliate my mother. Feeling no victory, she tightly hugged me under the assault of his smear campaign. She wept, and I remember wanting desperately, 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 desperately to disappear. Then, somehow, I eventually fell asleep. Waking up the next day, there were no signs anyone had been in my bedroom. It was like a dream. Maybe it didn't happen, I thought, hopefully. As I walked to the kitchen for breakfast, everything seemed fine and normal, but it wasn't. I called my father back. "Hello, Chris?" "Yes," I answered. We set up a time and date. I was interested in the photograph of his parents. It would be something I could give my children. One of them's here, by the way. Within a week, I was driving 7 hours south to my father's house. My father squatted on land owned by a local farmer who took pity on him. It was a small house, yet comfortable. Maybe 20 people lived in that incorporated community in the heart of the Midwest. Upon arriving, I walked up to the door and knocked. No one answered. I waited, knocked again. No one answered. Finally, I called my father. "Oh, you're at my house? What day is it?" "I'll be right there." A memory surfaced. It was Christmas Eve. My mother asked my father to pick up a Christmas tree. Instead, he disappeared to the local tavern. I didn't see him much later on Christmas Day. He was hungover. And in place of a Christmas tree, a roadside shrub rested in a Folgers coffee can. My mother was in tears. As I unwrapped presents, I sensed something was crumbling. The bottom was falling out, revealing something that felt heavy, sad, and overwhelming underneath our lives. My father drove up in a used pickup truck, shook my hand like we were friends. What are we, I thought? Who are we? Father and son? Friends? Is there even a category for our relationship? I was at a loss. Is this trip my way of figuring it out? We walked into a small kitchen. The stove was unused and clean. The kitchen table was littered with prescription bottles, vitamins, and stacks of mail. He gave a brief tour of his home. At one point, we stood on the rotting planks of the screened front porch. A few blocks away, a state police car motored along the rural streets. My father watched with great attention, wondering perhaps if they might be coming for him. When we returned to the kitchen, he showed me his loaded rifle with one hand as the other defiantly clutched a stack of unpaid bills. What are they going to do, take my belongings? He chuckled. After my parents' divorce, he often returned to our house, pacing the porch and ringing the doorbell until it was exhausted. While his boots punctured the safety of our home, he verbally assaulted my mother and threatened to take me away. His visits coincided with the closing of the local tavern. His shadow moved back and forth across the curtains like some horror film. The hairs on my back stood alert, attending to each sound. Relief only arrived when the footsteps moved off the porch onto the glass, culminating in the slam of a car door as two tires sprayed gravel on our front lawn. Also, there were times when he followed us on the highway. He would tail us closely for miles, then suddenly speed past, disappearing into the horizon. And like a returning nightmare, he'd reappear, driving wildly toward us at high speed, as if we were playing a game of chicken. I now had the picture of his parents, the reason I'd driven to visit him. As we sat in the kitchen talking about neutral sketches of the past, I became aware that I was waiting for something else. Would he say, "I'm sorry. I'd like to have a better relationship. I've made some really, really bad choices." It was clearly his move. But he didn't. An early afternoon stretched into the evening. I took the reins. I was now an adult with a family, a graduate degree, a steady job, a fairly good reputation. I thanked him for the picture. I looked straight into his eyes, shook his hand, and then walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat. As I drove off, he stood in the driveway. He looked lonely, sad, and frail. I knew it was the last time I'd ever see him. And I felt at peace. When have you made a hard choice and felt at peace? Comments, reflections, complaints? Yeah, Molly.
It was come as no surprise to Dan that I have a complaint. You know, it's interesting to hear you say at the beginning of this that it's okay for a story to have a hard ending. And I feel like it's almost a harder message to encourage people to understand that stories can have happy endings these days. Things are very hard in our world. I'm a millennial, so this is like classic, millennial angst, dread of the future. But like the past several books that I've read that said, it will be a beautiful novel, and then, 5 pages from the end, something terrible happens.
Yeah.
Someone dies, something catastrophic happens. And I put down the book and I just think, to me, it's the opposite, where it's just like, couldn't we just, get everybody through to the end this one time? And this is, not apropos of your story, which is completely separate and I thought very moving personally, but I think that might be something to explore is, how can you encourage people that you can have a happy ending? Because I think it's almost harder to find in literature and film in the real world today. And in fact, I have to follow like happy news, like only happy news story things, just to kind of give myself that that boost of joy. Anyway, that just stuck out to me as you introduced the story.
I'm so happy that you brought that up, and I agree. And really happy you brought that up. I'm going to end on that note, by the way. So.
Just everybody, nobody died while we're here tonight. All make it through. It'd be great. So, yeah.
Thank you for the courage of bringing that to the room. I really appreciate it.
Hard choice, but I'm feeling at peace.
Your generation is so tied into online digital news. Things are coming at you at high speed. When I grew up, we didn't have all that. So there were a lot of times where things were tied up with a little bow, and it wasn't real to me. It didn't seem real to me. So I have the opposite feeling.
We have balance. Great, thank you.
But I can appreciate what you said.
Anyone else? It's a real killjoy, huh, that story? Jeez.
I think it's taken me this long in my life to come to the point of, I just said this to your sister the other day, Thich Nhat Hanh and other children have said, no mud, no lotus. That's a place that I try to stay in. If I have to roll in the mud, then something's going to come out of it.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Something pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is the peace the happy ending?
Could you say it again? I don't think I caught.
The peace.
Yeah.
The happy ending.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a given that there will be good times and bad times. Arriving at a peaceful place with either of those. So I guess listening to your story, I felt it was impactful, and mostly the sense of peace at the end, that this is right, even though such painful things happen.
Thank you so much for picking up on that. That was true for me in that moment, as I did feel at peace. Felt like I had done all the pre-work for decades, maybe. We'll leave that story out. But yeah, it's just weird, isn't it? I mean, it's.
Does it stem from your self-love, loving yourself? Doesn't it stem from that?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the mindfulness practice, therapy, having a lot of good friends, all of that. Yeah.
Did you feel at peace right away when you were pulling away in the car, or did it take a little bit of time Peter to say, okay, I reconciled this all these years?
That's a great question.
Or maybe you got better, or more at peace as time went on?
There was some of it going down. I remember driving down, and then I was surprised it could somehow it be different when I was there. And then at some point, I recognized that it wasn't. And I don't know why, but at that point, I felt at peace. I felt like I tried to keep an open door, and at some point, it became clear to me that that door was not going to be reciprocated. And at that point, I was like, okay.
It's like the monkey bars. You let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to see.
Well, it doesn't seem very happy for your father. So I guess my concern is for the father, even though I know you had a certain peace about it. And did you feel, I don't know whether guilt is the right word, but something that, you know, that was your father, and even bad things happened that, and I had a feeling that you might have wanted the door open so that you had
Yeah.
the thing, but the fact that you did leave him and he wasn't willing to make a connection with you, which was very sad for him. I mean, it just was an inability for him, and I think he could have opened himself up for it, but he just wasn't able to. And
Right.
I find that very sad, and you know, I see
Yeah.
that in families, and it's like, oh, come on. I want a happy ending, I guess.
It is sad, and it, to be honest, periodically it's sad, and yet it's just what it is.
Yeah, it is just.
It's just what it is.
And it's, you know, I think good for you and as the son and considering all the issues, but it's, I just see, I felt sadness for your father.
Yeah. Thanks.
How much time elapsed from seeing your father or when you found out that he had passed?
Yeah. So I was teaching a Zoom call, and I got a text from my sister that my father had died 8 months after he died.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why so late?
Great question.
You didn't really know.
Text while you're teaching it.
Yeah. And she just read it because it was in an obituary. Yeah.
And maybe, I like happy endings too, but maybe his request, his asking you if you wanted the picture was maybe his way of
Yep.
reconciling.
Right. I mean, I think that's what he was offering me,
Yeah.
and there I could meet him.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Did you feel any anger when you were with him? Or was
No.
it just so frail that it was
No,
the terrorist that you knew as a kid?
I just felt at peace. I just felt like I was there to be with him, and the way that he could be there. I really didn't feel anger. After all this happiness that we've generated here, one of the things that I hope we might do, and I'd like to spend maybe the next 5 or 6 minutes, you've heard me, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice if you could turn to a couple people around you? And it's all optional, of course. You get your chance to say the happy story. But I have one for you to finish, so I just want you to know that, Molly. But the invitation is for you to share a story. If you wish, it's optional, with a couple people around you. So maybe groups of 2 and 3. And if this is a little uncomfortable for you, you don't have to do it, because I like lots of flexibility and options. But that was the whole idea of the book, is I share my story, but I know that you have yours. And I know it's really, really important for our world, for the world to hear your story, whatever that might be. It could be very simple, what you had for breakfast this morning, or if you have an animal, or a neighbor, or a vegetable garden, or so pair up, 2s and 3s. We'll go for about 5 or 6 minutes. I'll invite the bell. Molly, you're going to get your story. Yeah, so great question. Thank you so much for asking that question. So sometimes, here's the other thing about the stories. Not all stories have a happy ending. Some do. But here's another thing that I didn't say that you're helping me to think about. Like, for instance, I just told kind of probably a sad story about my father. But then there's a bigger picture than that story. This is that story, but life is much larger. When I think about the largesse of life, it's bigger, right? And often it can include more happiness, more comfort. To a stranger. Thank you. You're welcome. Very much so. How was that?
It was good.
We probably should have had more of that, huh?
Yeah. That was good.
That was good. We want to thank you so much again for squandering your time on a Friday night. Thank you so much for the gift, the precious gift of your time to listen. I had no idea that this would lead to this, and I'd be able to be surrounded by friends and great questions and really thoughtful reflections. My hope is that your story, as I'm sure it already is, will continue to grow and to bless those around you, and that you will find other people's story to do the same for you. So, Molly, many years ago, I was in the car driving, and I had this really bad habit. Maybe many habits, but I imagine my ancestors, because I happen to know a lot of my aunts and my uncles and cousins and great uncles, all that have kind of passed on. And in my mind, particularly when I'm alone, I talk with them and I ask them questions. I know it's really me just reflecting, but I picture them. And I remember one time I was driving somewhere between Madison and Milwaukee, and I said, hey, I want to summon all of the ancestors, and I'm doing some new things in my life, and I just need a little bit of advice from the round table of all the ancestors. And just like immediately in my mind, there was this response. And it was, and this is what I want to offer and send you out with. The response from all the ancestors, and I pass it on to you. Whatever you do, do with great joy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much, Chris. The UW Health Mindfulness program has a policy for drop-ins is that we don't charge any money. It's freely offered and freely given. Well, this isn't about a person named Dana. This is a Pali word, Dana, which symbolizes generosity. And so, so I'll put this in the back. And basically, generosity is if something resonated with you tonight, you can put something in here in the form of money, or you take it with you, as Chris has offered us, and you share it that way. So wherever it goes, let your generosity flow. So I'll put this in the back, and Chris will be signing books for anybody that would like, and there's some books back there to be purchased. Have a great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you.